Okay, let's see. New Year's resolutions for 2023. Get in better shape, take over the world, and, oh yes, read and watch even more horror. Welcome to 2023. I have to say, 2022 turned out to be a year of horrors. On the plus side, that included some great books and movies, and on the negative side, it also included, well, just look around the world. And it certainly looks like 2023 is going to bring us even more of the same. Let us hope, at least, that the year ahead brings us even more of the former, and not quite so much of the latter. This channel, at least, is all about the right kind of horror, and so I'm here to tip you off to some of the most anticipated horror movies and horror books for the year ahead. We begin, as always, with a couple important caveats. First of all, this list is not, will not be, and cannot be anything close to complete. There are literally thousands of books and movies released every year, and I just can't talk about all of them. What I am going to talk about are some of the ones whose marketing has come to and caught my attention. I'm also afraid that many of the release dates may turn out to be wrong. It seems like, especially over the last few years, publishers and film distributors have been terrible at sticking to their deadlines, and release dates have been, let us say, scribbled in sand rather than etched in stone. So, I'm doing my best here, but all this information is certainly subject to change. For all I know, some of them could even have changed between the time I wrote these notes and the time I published this video. The way I'm going to present the list this year is in something as close to chronological order as I can get. We'll discuss the movies first and then the books, but I'm going to try to keep them in order within their respective categories. Finally, usually when I make a video, I put purchase links to all the books and movies I discuss down in the What's It, making it easy for you to find things and giving y'all a way to help support my work here on this channel. Because none of these have come out yet, that isn't going to be a complete list, but I'll do the best that I can to at least provide some pre-order links for ones where such a thing exists. Without further ado, let's jump right in, because this list is going to be a long one. Okay, let's start with the horror movies for 2023. The first one to have a lot of people excited is Megan, spelled with a 3 in place of a letter E. Directed by Gerard Johnstone and produced by James Wan, this seems like Blumhouse's attempt to merge the sentient artificial intelligence and evil doll subgenres. When engineer Gemma creates the doll Megan, which stands for Model 3 Generative Android, and gives it to her niece, the doll becomes murderously protective of the young girl. It's hard to tell whether this is meant to be straight horror or something of a horror comedy, and of course a lot of it looks fairly familiar, but at least for me it still looks worth watching. Megan hits theaters on January 6th, so hopefully it will mark a good start to the year. Also coming on January 6th, in this case to Amazon Prime, is The Rig. This is apparently a series, though I don't know exactly how many episodes it will feature. According to its synopsis, when the crew of the Kinloch Bravo find themselves cut off from all communication with the Scottish mainland by a mysterious fog, they must fight to find a way home, whilst managing environmental pressures, mounting paranoia, and rising tensions. But as the threat facing them reveals itself to be something beyond their wildest imagination, the divided crew must form an alliance to ensure survival. What the synopsis doesn't tell us directly is that the so-called Kinloch Bravo is an isolated oil rig, making this sound a lot like my kind of story. I always like a good horror story set in that kind of isolated and unforgiving environment. I can't really say much else about it, except that the trailer makes it look like the kind of show in which there's a very fine line between greatness and terribleness, and I really hope it finds itself on the right side of that line. but I, for one, am pretty excited to find out. January 13th also looks like a pretty good day for horror. The first offering on that day is a film called The Price We Pay. According to its description, after an intense holdup at a pawn shop, Grace is taken hostage by the thieves. Forced to take refuge at a remote farmhouse late at night, they discover a secret dungeon with evidence of sadistic violence. And when grandfather comes home, all hell breaks loose. Can Grace muster the courage to escape the gut-wrenching fates that befall her criminal companions? That also sounds a lot like my kind of movie. One of the wonderful things about horror is that it consistently reminds us that people tend not to get away with things. I don't know what the evil in this story actually is, necessarily, but that it preys upon violent criminals seems like the kind of horror movie justice we can all get behind. It looks like the film is also getting a streaming release on January 10th, but since I don't believe in home video releases preceding theatrical releases, I'll be hoping its limited theatrical run on January 13th reaches a screen within driving distance of my house. The very same day also sees the release of The Devil Conspiracy, which looks like an action horror picture about the war between angels and demons in the modern world of biotechnology. I'll be completely honest and admit that it doesn't look like the greatest film ever made, but it does look like a lot of fun, and likely the kind of thing best seen with an audience, so you might also want to head to the theater for The Devil Conspiracy on January 13. Another one that looks interesting is Snow Falls. It follows a group of friends stranded and snowed in at a remote cabin with dwindling supplies and pressures on their sanity as they face something. It's not entirely clear what evil they're up against, but I've said before that I quite like a horror story set in an isolated, wintry sort of place. I think that's a big part of what makes The Shining work, and this seems like it's exploring similar territory. It looks like Snow Falls will be getting a streaming release on January 17th. Another Blumhouse release, There's Something Wrong with the Children, is also right around the corner. Whatever you think about Blumhouse, you've got to admit they're cranking out horror movies faster than just about anyone else, and this one is about a family on vacation. After the two children disappear into the woods overnight and reappear shortly after, one of the adults starts to think something is wrong with the children as they've begun to behave strangely. I don't know much else, but it seems like this could easily be a possession story or something more like a changeling or body snatcher kind of story. Either way, I'm intrigued. There's Something Wrong with the Children is also getting its streaming release on January 17th. On January 20th, we should be able to see Alone at Night, an erotic horror thriller starring Ashley Benson, Pamela Anderson, and Paris Hilton. This film follows an online adult model who's trapped in a house with a killer. I don't know much else about it, but it does sound a bit like a 21st century update of the classic slasher plot, so I'm keen to at least give it a try. As far as I can tell, it will be released simultaneously in theaters and streaming services on January 20th. My advice, for whatever it's worth, is to opt for the theatrical screening if you're at all able to do so. The streaming services are wonderful rental options, but I really don't like to see what they're doing to the theaters. But on a more positive note, January 27th also looks like a pretty big day for horror, with at least 3 film releases on my list. First up, and probably the biggest release of the day, is Infinity Pool, Brandon Cronenberg's new film starring Alexander Skarsgård, Mia Goth, and Cleopatra Coleman. Details on exactly what happens in this film are sparse, but given a Cronenberg is at the helm, I think we can expect some delightfully weird creepiness throughout. There are also plenty of reasons to be excited. The casting is stellar, of course, and the trailer looks quite intriguing. However, I am a little bit concerned about one thing I read about the film. Apparently, the film was originally given an NC-17 rating by the censorship goons at the Motion Picture Association, and it had to be re-edited to secure its R rating. I don't know how much was cut out or how much the cuts will weaken the film, but I do know that it's long past time to entirely dissolve the Motion Picture Association. Regardless, I'll certainly be seeing Infinity Pool at the theater on January 27. The same day, we'll get our first chance to see Fear, a new movie whose trailer looks intriguing, though details on the plot are sparse at this point. It looks like there's some kind of evil that makes people confront their own fears, which is a fun idea. The written description I found mentions something about a contagious airborne pathogen, which makes me think that perhaps this pathogen affects people psychologically in some way, and that's why they're experiencing their fears, but I'm not sure if that's right. One way or the other, I suspect we're going to continue seeing a lot of virus movies over the next couple of years, but I'm intrigued by what I've seen so far of Fear. It will have a limited theatrical release on January 27, so hopefully we'll all be able to find screenings. Finally, for January, it looks like we might finally get a chance to see Unwelcome. This is the story of a young English couple who moved to a new home in rural Ireland only to discover their new property is also inhabited by what the written description calls goblins and the trailer calls redcaps, providing a bit more specificity. The redcap of folklore is a murderous entity said to inhabit ruined castles on the Anglo-Scottish border. Whether the film sticks to that lore or not remains to be seen, but either way, it should be a fun movie. This is one that was actually on my list of anticipated movies last year, as it was originally scheduled for release in February of 2022, then moved to October, and now moved to January of 2023. Hopefully they'll actually stick to their schedule this time and let us see it on January 27th. Well, maybe. According to the film's Wikipedia page, that's the date it's scheduled for release in Ireland and the UK, but I haven't found any information specifically about an American release. Fingers crossed, and let's hope we get to see it soon. February is also looking like a good month for horror movies, beginning with Knock at the Cabin. This is M. Night Shyamalan's much anticipated adaptation of Paul Tremblay's novel The Cabin at the End of the World. Changing the title admittedly annoys me, but other than that, I'm quite looking forward to it. Tremblay's book was quite good. In fact, many people consider it his finest work. While I don't agree with that, it's nevertheless a fascinating read, and I'm curious to see how it plays out on screen and how closely Shyamalan's film follows the source material. Knock at the Cabin gets a theatrical release on February 3rd. Just a day after Valentine's Day, we're finally going to see one of the most talked about horror movies of the last several months, and that's Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. By now, I'm sure we've all seen the trailer, and a lot of us may have conflicting thoughts regarding the work of evil genius required to turn a beloved children's character into a slasher. But I, for one, am very much looking forward to seeing what the movie itself is actually like. Miraculously, this is also getting a theatrical release on February 15th, though I don't really expect it to hang around very long at your local cinema, so you probably want to jump on it quickly. Personally, I'm just distraught that they couldn't find their way to release it one day earlier, because I can think of no better place to bring a date on Valentine's Day, but alas, we can't always get everything we want. We're also going to finally get to see the highly anticipated Cocaine Bear this year. People of a certain age, or who enjoy reading bizarre history, may remember the time in 1985 when a black bear overdosed on cocaine that had been dropped out of an airplane by drug smugglers. Well, Elizabeth Banks has directed a film inspired by the very same story, though certainly taking plenty of creative liberties to turn it into the over-the-top romp we're all expecting. Cocaine Bear will be in theaters on February 24th, and in addition to the movie, you can also see the real Cocaine Bear, which is taxidermied and on display at the Kentucky for Kentucky Fun Mall in Lexington. On March 10, we're going to be able to see Scream 6, and I can just about guarantee that's going to be one of the more popular ones this year, and also one of the more controversial ones. Last year's Scream 5, which was actually just called Scream, which still annoys me, was actually pretty good. And it did a good job of lampooning this new trend of resurrecting all the old favorite franchises with which we all grew up. But given that Scream 6 is going to be the first film without Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, I'm sure a lot of people are going to have conflicted thoughts. On the one hand, Scream 5 did already establish that we're headed toward handing over the reins to a new cast of characters, so this doesn't come out of nowhere. But at the same time, Scream without Sidney Prescott sounds a lot like spaghetti without meatballs. It may still be great, but it's going to feel like something important is missing. Regardless, Scream 6 will slash its way into theaters on March 10. A week later, we'll get to see Adam Driver in a movie called 65, about an astronaut who lands on a distant planet only to discover he's actually landed on Earth, but 65 million years ago. I honestly don't have super high hopes for it, although Sam Raimi is attached, and that's somewhat encouraging. But I don't really have high hopes for it to be anything even approaching fine cinema. But if there's one thing all the Jurassic Park sequels have taught us, it's that dinosaur action sequences are their own reward. I suspect this will be one to see at the theater with the biggest and butteriest bucket of popcorn you can find. 65 will be playing starting March 17. One I'm particularly curious about is The Pope's Exorcist, starring Russell Crowe as Father Gabriel Amorth, the famed Catholic exorcist who was claimed to have performed over 160,000 exorcisms before his death in September of 2016. I'm pretty excited to see how the cinema treats this case, because cinematic exorcism and the actual rite of exorcism in the Catholic Church bear remarkably little similarity to one another. The possible exception being The Exorcist. And that's evident in the number of exorcisms claimed by Father Amorth. In order to get to 160,000 exorcisms during his 30-year career as an exorcist, he would have needed to perform more than 14 exorcisms every single day without taking a break. If one considers the exorcism to consist of any single prayer of exorcism, this may be plausible, though it's still an extraordinary number. But if one expects an exorcism to refer to something like we see in the movies, it's just impossible. All that said, I've read Amorth's books, and as part of my ongoing work in paranormal research, I've recently been engaged in a fairly deep study of the development of rites of exorcism throughout history, so I'm pretty excited to see the movie. The Pope's Exorcist should be released, hopefully theatrically, on April 7th. Have you ever found yourself sitting around and rereading Dracula and saying to yourself, you know what this needs? Nicolas Cage. If so, you're in luck. Nick Cage stars as Dracula in the new movie Renfield, a comedic look at the life of the Count's deranged familiar. It's going to either be awesome or terrible, with very little chance of anything in between. I'm eager to find out which when it comes out on April 14th. The much anticipated new Evil Dead movie should also be coming in April. There were some vain hopes that it might have come out last year, but this new release date seems a bit more likely to stick. Evil Dead Rise is the 5th installment of the Evil Dead franchise, and we haven't seen a whole lot of details yet, except that it sounds like it's set in a Los Angeles apartment building instead of the woods. As much as I think the woods sound immeasurably better than Los Angeles, this ought to bring a fresh setting to the franchise, and I'm pretty excited about it. Initially, Evil Dead Rise was scheduled for a release on HBO Max, a streaming service. But Warner Brothers seems to have finally come to their senses and realized that streaming-only releases are a terrible idea. Therefore, I'm pleased to report that Evil Dead Rise is expected to see a wide theatrical release on April 21st. I'm sure that there must be some horror movies coming out in May and June, but I haven't yet figured out which ones they're going to be, so let's skip right to Insidious 5. When the first Insidious movie came out, I thought it was a truly excellent piece of horror, even if it dropped the ball a bit in the ending. See my video, by the way, on why the ending is the most difficult part of a horror story. The franchise has admittedly started to seem a little bit stale, with the sequels getting progressively worse reviews, but it does remain popular enough, I suppose, to justify this fifth installment. We'll have to see whether Insidious 5 breathes any new life into the franchise on July 7th. August 4th should see the release of Meg 2: The Trench, sequel to 2018's Megalodon movie, The Meg. There's really not a whole lot one can say about it. It's another giant shark movie. Ever since Jaws, they've been a dime a dozen, but I keep coming back for more and I'm usually entertained by them. August 11 is looking like a busy day with 2 releases scheduled. First is the new Haunted Mansion movie. I have mixed thoughts about that one, to be honest with you. I love the Haunted Mansion ride, but its history in film adaptation hasn't been all that impressive. I'm told that the Muppets version is actually not bad, but since it's only on Disney Plus... And that's the problem. Classic Disney is great, but I'm really not all that impressed with the company these days, either creatively or politically. But I love the Haunted Mansion enough to hold out some hope that this movie will be good. If they give it a proper theatrical release, I'll be the first in line to find out. On the other hand, if they just dump it on Disney Plus like they have with so many of their other properties, I'll never know. The other big release for August 11 is Last Voyage of the Demeter. Yeah, it's another Dracula movie, but I'm actually pretty excited about it. If you've been around this channel long enough, you know that I'm a sucker for nautical horror, so the fact that this one is set on the Demeter is pretty exciting already. And given that many of Dracula's adaptations seem to diverge completely from the source material, I'm also pleased that it at least sounds like the filmmakers are returning to the kind of horror Dracula is really supposed to be. And it looks like it's slated for a theatrical release, so I'm triply excited. September the 1st is not only my birthday, but the projected release date of a new movie called The Bigfoot Trap. All I know about it is that it follows a journalist who gets trapped in a Bigfoot trap set by a Sasquatch hunter. It's probably all kinds of cheesy fun, so hopefully its release will prove to be a good birthday present for me. A little later in the month, The Nun 2 should be released on September 8. I've shared my thoughts on the Conjuring franchise before, and probably will again, but I do keep enjoying at least most of the movies, so I'll be curious to see what they have to offer us in this new one. Since I'll be going to the theater anyway, if anyone wants to join me in putting on a creepy nun costume and hanging out at the back of the darkened theater, just let me know. October ought to be the perfect month for horror movies, and it does seem like this October is shaping up to have a few good ones. First, though, is one that has me a bit nervous, and that's The Exorcist. This new movie is meant to be a direct sequel to the original film, not a reboot, thank God, with Ellen Burstyn reprising her role as Chris MacNeil, presumably using her experiences to help another family cope with demonic possession. But let's just say I have some mixed thoughts. The Exorcist is one of the finest films ever made. I don't think anyone can really argue with that. And I certainly want to see more work exploring that story and mythology. I can't get enough of it. However, and this is a big however, it's all but impossible to hold up to the perfection of the source material. The Exorcist 2 was a steaming pile, and the films from the early 2000s weren't much better. Only The Exorcist 3 really holds up, and even it's not quite as good as the first one. With that in mind, do I really expect the new movie to recapture the magic of The Exorcist and give us the story we're looking for? Honestly, I can't really say that I do expect it to. Don't get me wrong, I'm still gonna see it and I'm still hoping for the best, but I just don't really think Hollywood has what it takes anymore. This year's The Exorcist is meant to be the first in a new trilogy directed by David Gordon Green, who directed the 3 recent Halloween movies. Some of the chatter I'm hearing so far isn't very hopeful. A lot of people hated what he did with Halloween and are fearful he's going to do the same with The Exorcist. To be fair, I didn't actually hate the entirety of the new Halloween trilogy. The first 2 may not have held up to the original Halloween, but they weren't bad. It was only Halloween Ends that really screwed the pooch. But at the same time, Halloween seems like an easier franchise to manage than The Exorcist. So if he couldn't quite land the former, how is he possibly going to handle the latter? I will be finding my way to the theater with very cautious optimism, let's say, when The Exorcist comes out, which it's expected to do on October 13th. Which, yes, is a Friday. I don't know whether that's a good or bad omen. Yet another franchise gets yet another sequel on October 27, and that's Saw X. My thoughts here are similar to The Exorcist, although I don't think Saw is quite as high a bar to reach. Listen, I'm a fan of the franchise. I've liked them all well enough for what they are, but even I have to admit that they've lost some of their mojo after the first couple of movies. There's really not all that much more to say in the story, I don't think. However, while they may have gotten repetitive in terms of theme and character, the kills at least continue to be entertaining. I'm also intrigued by the fact that Tobin Bell is going to reprise his role as John Kramer. I have no idea how that's going to work, so I'll be first in line to see it, if for no other reason than to see how they pull that one off. The same day should see the release of Elevator Game. The Elevator Game is an urban legend, sort of in the same genre as Bloody Mary, that seems to have originated in Asia and made its rounds on the internet when teenagers made so-called challenge videos sometime around 2014. Many people believe the game comes from South Korea, though I've found at least one source that traces its origin to a series of elevator malfunctions in Japan in 2006. More recently, others have tried to connect it to the death of Elisa Lam, though that particular mystery has been solved, and the Netflix documentary Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel actually does a great job of covering the whole case. Anyway, the idea of the elevator game is that if you step into an elevator and perform a certain ritual, you can ride the elevator to another dimension. Okay, it's silly, childish nonsense, but it's admittedly good fodder for a horror movie. Elevators themselves can be remarkably creepy places, so even though I'm maybe not all that impressed by the urban legend that served as its inspiration, I'm quite curious to see The Elevator Game, which also comes out on October 27, just in time for Halloween. Speaking of Halloween, we need some good Halloween movies, and hopefully this year will deliver some, but I honestly don't have any good information on Halloween-specific movies yet. There are, however, several additional movies rumored to be coming out this year, even though we don't yet have specific release dates. One of those actually is a Halloween movie, if we ever get to see it, and that's Dark Harvest, based on the novel by Norman Partridge. It was originally scheduled for release not even last year, but all the way back in 2021, after being announced as long ago as 2019, so we've waited long enough. The most recent release date scheduled was September 9th of 2022, but that obviously came and went with no Dark Harvest. So there's been no further confirmation or word that it might come out this year, but I'm still holding out some hope. We're also expecting to see a film adaptation of Stephen King's short story The Boogeyman at some point this year. It's directed by Rob Savage, and I don't really know much else about it. Obviously, I've read the source story, but the movie hasn't received a whole lot of buzz yet. It seems like a lot of filmmakers have been mining King's old short stories to adapt to the screen, and at least some of them have been successful, so I'm sure I'll want to watch it. Speaking of Stephen King, there's still that new adaptation of Salem's Lot coming out, and it's starting to look like 2023 might be the year we finally get to see it, though frankly I'm not sure if we need another remake. The 1979 miniseries was a great adaptation of King's novel, and the 2004 series was a steaming pile, so I'm really not sure that these are moving in the right direction. I'll see it anyway, but I really wish they'd adapt any number of the other highly worthy horror novels in the world rather than just remaking the same one over and over again. There's also a new movie set in the world of The Strangers, which was one of the better and genuinely creepy home invasion movies out there. No idea what the new one is going to be like, though I've heard rumors that it's meant to be an origin story of the invaders. Personally, I don't like that idea, as I think the wonderful thing about The Strangers is how random and inexplicable everything seems. Another rumor suggests it's actually a direct remake of the original, which somehow seems like an even worse idea. But if the new movie manages to capture some of the tension of the original, it might very well be worth a watch. There's another movie called Blood, which seems to be the story of a young boy who's become a vampire, and his mother who tries to deliver him a consistent supply of blood. It actually looks really good, but I'm not sure about its release date. I found a listing online that says it'll be released in April, but that was labeled as a Turkish release, so I'm not sure when we'll get to see it in the United States, but it seems likely to be sometime this year. Finally, we have a movie called Project Wolf Hunting. That's a Korean movie that takes place on a cargo ship. Y'all know how I love nautical horror. In this case, the ship is transporting criminals who seem to take over the ship, and there also seems to be some kind of biological experiment on board. The Koreans have been doing some great things in horror lately, and this one looks terrific as well. It's already been released in South Korea and has been playing the international festival circuit and getting mostly positive reviews. I don't know when we'll be able to see it in the States, but whenever it comes, I'm certainly looking forward to it. Holy crap, that's a lot of movies. But we're still not done yet. We've got the most anticipated horror books of 2023 to get to. Before I get to that, let me remind you to help support this channel by making sure you've subscribed, rung the notification bell, and pressed the like button. It'd also be great if you could leave me some comments and share my videos with your friends to help defeat YouTube's evil algorithm. Thanks in advance. Let's get to some books. We're going to hit the ground running this year with a book that indeed might already be out by the time you see this video, though not quite yet as I'm filming it, and that's Abandon by Blake Crouch. On Christmas Day in 1893, every man, woman, and child in a remote mining town disappeared. Belongings forsaken, meals left to freeze in vacant cabins, and not a single bone found. Now, journalist Abigail Foster and her historian father have set out to explore the long-abandoned town and learn what happened. With them are two backcountry guides, along with a psychic and a paranormal photographer, who are there to investigate rumors that the town is haunted. But Abigail and her companions are about to learn that the town's ghosts are the least of their worries. 20 miles from civilization, with a blizzard bearing down, they realize they are not alone. The ordeal that follows will test this small team past the breaking point as they battle the elements and human foes alike, and discover that the town's secrets still have the power to kill. Part journey into Old West history, part nail-biting survival thriller, Abandon is a bloody, darkly surprising tale as only Blake Crouch could deliver. Now, tell me that doesn't sound great. I love a good story about an entire town disappearing. Roanoke. And given my work with the Rocky Mountain Paranormal Research Society, I can certainly relate to people setting out to try to uncover the truth behind such a mystery. Honestly, this one really sounds like a winner, and it will be available January 3rd from Valentine Books. Next up is The Nightmare Man by J.H. Markert. Blackwood Mansion looms, surrounded by nightmare pines atop the hill over the small town of Crooked Tree. Ben Bookman, best-selling novelist and heir to the Blackwood estate, spent a weekend at the ancestral home to finish writing his latest horror novel, The Scarecrow. Now, on the eve of the book's release, the terrible story within begins to unfold in real life. Detective Mills arrives at the scene of a gruesome murder, a family butchered and bundled inside cocoons stitched from corn husks, and hung from the rafters of a barn, eerily mirroring the opening of Bookman's latest novel. When another family is killed in a similar manner, Mills, along with his daughter, rookie detective Samantha Blue, is determined to find the link to the book and the killer before the story reaches its chilling climax. As the series of Scarecrow crimes continues to mirror the book, Ben quickly becomes the prime suspect. He can't remember much from the night he finished writing the novel, but he knows he wrote it in the atrium, his grandfather's forbidden room full of numbered books. Thousands of books. Books without words. As Ben digs deep into Blackwood's history, he learns he may have triggered a release of something trapped long ago. And it won't stop with the horrors buried within the pages of his book. Okay, there's a lot going on there, no? From the character being named Bookman, to the murders, to the weird library of numbered books, I honestly don't know where to start. But I can say I'm looking forward to it because it sounds delightfully weird. The Nightmare Man will be available January 10 from Crooked Lane Books. One that I think will certainly be among the most talked about books of the year is Grady Hendrix's new book, How to Sell a Haunted House. When Louise finds out her parents have died, she dreads going home. She doesn't want to leave her daughter with her ex and fly to Charleston. She doesn't want to deal with her family home, stuffed to the rafters with the remnants of her father's academic career and her mother's lifelong obsession with puppets and dolls. She doesn't want to learn how to live without the two people who knew and loved her best in the world. Most of all, she doesn't want to deal with her brother Mark, who never left their hometown, gets fired from one job after another, and resents her success. Unfortunately, she'll need his help to get the house ready for sale, because it'll take more than some new paint on the walls and clearing out a lifetime of memories to get this place on the market. But some houses don't want to be sold, and their home has other plans for both of them. Grady Hendrix has become one of the most popular horror authors in recent years, and for good reason. He has a talent for blending the creepy and the quirky in a way few could pull off, and he clearly has an encyclopedic knowledge of horror, which he exploits to great effect in crafting interesting and often self-aware horror stories. I, for one, am keen to see his take on the Haunted House novel, so I'll be getting my copy as soon as it comes out on January 17th from Berkeley. January 24th is also going to be a good day in the literary world. First of all, we'll get our chance to read All Hallows by Christopher Golden. It's Halloween night, 1984, in Coventry, Massachusetts, and two families are unraveling. Up and down the street, secrets are being revealed, and all the while, mixed in with the trick-or-treaters of all ages, 4 children who do not belong are walking door to door, merging with the kids of Parmenter Road. Children in vintage costumes with faded, eerie makeup. They seem terrified and beg the neighborhood kids to hide them away, to keep them safe from the Cunning Man. There's a small clearing in the woods now that was never there before, and a blackthorn tree that doesn't belong at all. These odd children claim that the Cunning Man is coming for them, and they want the local kids to protect them. But with families falling apart and the neighborhood splintered by bitterness, who will save the children of Parmenter Road? All Hallows, the one night when everything is a mask. Those of you who watched my roundup of the best horror of 2022, and if you didn't, shame on you, will recognize Christopher Golden as one of my honorees, and so I'm certainly excited to read the new one. And it sounds like a great one, doesn't it? I don't quite understand the timing of its release, as it seems like it should maybe come out in late September or so to get us ready for the Halloween season, so maybe I'll buy my copy and hold it for a few months before I read it at a more appropriate time. But don't let that stop you from getting a copy, because I think it's going to be a good one. All Hallows will be released by St. Martin's Press on January 24. The same day, we're also going to be able to get our copies of Episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. Fade to Black is the newest hit ghost hunting reality TV show. Led by husband and wife team Matt and Claire Kirkland, it delivers weekly hauntings investigated by a dedicated team of ghost hunting experts. Episode 13 takes them to every ghost hunter's holy grail, the Paranormal Research Foundation. This brooding, derelict mansion holds secrets and clues about bizarre experiments that took place there in the 1970s. It's also famously haunted, and the team hopes their scientific techniques and high-tech gear will prove it. But as the house begins to reveal itself to them, proof of an afterlife might not be everything Matt dreamed of. A story told in broken pieces, in tapes, journals, and correspondence, this is the story of Episode 13, and how everything went terribly, horribly wrong. Y'all know I'm a sucker for stories about paranormal investigators who run up against the real thing. I think it's partly because in my work with Rocky Mountain Paranormal, we don't run up against anything that even hints at the paranormal all that often. As horribly as things might end up for the characters in horror stories, I think all of us are secretly, or not so secretly, hoping that something like that will happen just so we'd have something interesting to write about. Call it relating to the characters or call it wish fulfillment, but I can't get enough of these kinds of stories, and I'm excited to try this one. Episode 13 will be released January 24 by Red Hook. Moving on to February, we'll get Gothic by Philip Fracassi. On his 59th birthday, Tyson Parks, a famous but struggling horror writer, receives an antique desk from his partner Sarah, in the hopes that it will rekindle his creative juices. Perhaps inspire him to write another best-selling novel and prove his best years aren't behind him. A continent away, a mysterious woman makes inquiries with her sources around the world, seeking the whereabouts of a certain artifact her family has been hunting for centuries. With the help of a New York City private detective, she finally finds what she's been looking for. It's in the home of Tyson Parks. Meanwhile, as Tyson begins to use his new desk, he begins acting strange, violent, his writing more disturbing than anything he's done before. But publishers are paying top dollar, convinced his new work will be a hit, and Tyson will do whatever it takes to protect his newfound success, even if it means the destruction of the ones he loves, even if it means his own sanity. This is another one that might be written just for me. I love stories about antiques and antiquarians, and the idea of blending fiction with reality has always been fascinating to me, both as a literary device and from a psychological perspective. I'm told Gothic will be released on February 3rd by Cemetery Dance. Though, to be honest, as much as I love Cemetery Dance, and I do, I trust their release dates just about as much as I trust, well, a cursed antique desk, let's say. But I've heard talk that they're trying to turn things around and get back on schedule, so I'm prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt and hope this comes out on time. Another one I think everyone's eager to dive into is Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, the much anticipated sequel to 2021's My Heart is a Chainsaw. 4 years after her tumultuous senior year, Jade Daniels is released from prison right before Christmas when her conviction is overturned. But life beyond bars takes a dangerous turn as soon as she returns to Proof Rock. Convicted serial killer Dark Mill South, seeking revenge for 38 Dakota men hanged in 1862, escapes from his prison transfer due to a blizzard just outside of Proof Rock, Idaho. Dark Mill South's reunion tour began on December 12, 2019, a Thursday. 36 hours and 20 bodies later, on Friday the 13th, it would be over. Obviously, this is a sequel, so you probably want to read My Heart is a Chainsaw before you get this one. But if you haven't read that one yet, you really need to do so anyway. It's an excellent book, and I, for one, couldn't be more excited to see what Jade gets up to this time around. These books are horror books written specifically for horror fans, and I'm sure the new one will be just as filled with references to slasher movies as its predecessor. It was originally scheduled to come out last year, but got delayed, and is now scheduled for release on February 7 from Gallery Saga Press. But that's also going to be a pretty busy day, because it will also see the release of The Spite House by Johnny Compton. Eric Ross is on the run from a mysterious past with his 2 daughters in tow. Having left his wife, his house, his whole life behind in Maryland, he is desperate for money. It's not easy to find steady, safe work when you can't provide references, you can't stay in one place for long, you're paranoid your past is creeping back up on you. When he comes across the strange ad for the Masson House in Digener, Texas, Eric thinks they may finally have caught a lucky break. The Masson property, notorious for being one of the most haunted places in Texas, needs a caretaker of sorts. The owner is looking for proof of paranormal activity. All they need to do is stay in the house and keep a detailed record of everything that happens there, provided the house's horrors don't drive them all mad like the caretakers before them. The job calls to Eric, not just because there's a huge payout if they can make it through, but because he wants to explore the secrets of the Spite House. If it's indeed haunted, maybe it'll help him understand the uncanny power that clings to his family, driving them from town to town, making them afraid to stop running. And that is the kind of job I want. I mean, I'm not on the run from anyone because I live my life properly, though I can certainly understand the desire to drop off the radar and to be left alone. But what I really want is someone to offer me a job spending time living in and researching a haunted house. If you own some creepy old property, give me a call. But while I wait for the phone to ring, at least I can read about somebody with better fortune than I. The Spite House will be published on February 7th by Nightfire. Next up, we have Ancient Images by Ramsey Campbell. Tower of Fear is a lost horror film starring Karloff and Lugosi. A film historian who locates a copy dies while fleeing something that terrified him. His friend Sandy Allen vows to prove he found the film. She learns how haunted the production was, and the survivors of it still are. It contains a secret about Redfield, a titled family that owns a favorite British food, Staffa Life. The Redfield land has uncanny guardians, and one follows Sandy home. To maintain its fertility, Redfield demands a sacrifice, and a band of New Age travelers is about to set up camp there. You know, this idea of the cursed movie, it's an old one, and as much as I enjoy these tales, even I have to admit it's starting to get a little bit stale. However, when Ramsey Campbell writes something, we know it's going to be worth reading. He's one of the masters of British horror, and honestly, I'd probably read his shopping list if he ever saw fit to publish it. Even though some elements of this book's description sound maybe a bit familiar, I can almost guarantee the book will take them in unpredictable directions. Ancient Images is coming February 21st from Flame Tree Press. Also on February 21st, I have to mention the paperback release of The First Ghosts by Irving Finkel. Admittedly, this is not a horror novel, and admittedly, this isn't its first release. But the hardcover edition is, shall we say, a bit pricey if you can even find a copy, so I'm pretty excited to find an affordable release coming this year, and I've already got my copy on pre-order. The First Ghosts, Most Ancient of Legacies is Finkel's acclaimed scholarly work on the earliest ghost stories recorded in ancient texts from the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Finkel is the senior assistant keeper of ancient Mesopotamian script, languages, and cultures in the Middle East Department of the British Museum, and is considered one of the world's authorities on cuneiform writing. My own knowledge of cuneiform is limited to a mere cursory knowledge of the history of mathematics, so I couldn't be more excited to read about some of the most ancient ghost stories in the history of the world. This paperback edition is being published by Hodder and will be out on February 21. Yet another book coming out on the very same day is Alien, Enemy of My Enemy by Mary Sangiovanni. While a moon hurtles toward certain destruction, taking with it a Weyland-Yutani bioweapons lab, talks on a nearby colony could lead to all-out war among the colonies. Hygeia, an Outer Rim colony, is doomed. The moon on which it was built hurtles toward an inevitable collision with the dead planet Hephaestus. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. The clock is ticking, yet a distress signal arrives from a Weyland-Yutani biowarfare outpost. A desperate plan is launched to evacuate the trapped scientists. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, a mysterious black substance rains down on Earth settlements, creating hideous monsters from indigenous creatures and from human beings. Terran governments point the accusing finger at one another. Thus, on LV-846, a United Americas colony, high-level talks convene to address the galaxy-wide hostilities. But there's a plot brewing among the participants, one which could plunge the colonies into all-out war. The only hope for peace may lie with the deadliest ally imaginable. Of course, this is a tie-in with the Alien film franchise, inarguably one of the finest science fiction horror franchises in the world. I'll be honest and admit that I don't really read media tie-in novels all that often, but every once in a while I'll make an exception, and this is going to be one of those. Mary Sangiovanni is, of course, known for her excellent work in cosmic horror, and was the co-author of my pick for the best book of 2022, so we know we're in good hands. This book also includes a bonus RPG scenario for the Alien role-playing game if you're into that sort of thing. It'll be available February 21st from Titan Books. Finally, for February, we're going to get our copies of The Angel Maker by Alex North. Growing up in a beautiful house in the English countryside, Katie Shaw lived a charmed life. At the cusp of graduation, she had big dreams, a devoted boyfriend, and a little brother she protected fiercely. Until the day a violent stranger changed the fate of her family forever. Years later, still unable to live down the guilt surrounding what happened to her brother Chris, and now with a child of her own to protect, Katie struggles to separate the real threats from the imagined. Then she gets the phone call. Chris has gone missing and needs his big sister once more. Meanwhile, Detective Lawrence Page is facing a particularly gruesome crime. A distinguished professor of fate and free will has been brutally murdered just hours after firing his staff. All the leads point back to two old cases: the gruesome attack on teenager Christopher Shaw, and the despicable crimes of a notorious serial killer who, legend had it, could see the future. This may be more of a mystery thriller than a true horror novel, but it sounds horrific enough to merit recognition on my list. The same, after all, was true of the author's previous book, The Whisper Man, which was quite good and made me want to try some more of his works. As such, I'll be grabbing a copy of The Angel Maker when Celadon Books lets it loose on February 28. Moving on to March, the first book I've selected is Lone Women by Victor Laval. Adelaide Henry carries an enormous steamer trunk with her wherever she goes. It's locked at all times because when the trunk opens, people around Adelaide start to disappear. The year is 1915 and Adelaide is in trouble. Her secret sin killed her parents, forcing her to flee California in a hellfire rush and make her way to Montana as a homesteader. Dragging the trunk with her at every stop, she will become one of the lone women, taking advantage of the government's offer of free land for those who can tame it. Except that Adelaide isn't alone, and the secret she's tried so desperately to lock away might be the only thing that will help her survive the harsh territory. Something I've noticed lately is that I think we're about to enter a new sort of renaissance of horror westerns, and this might very well fit in with that category. I'm also a sucker for period horror, Victor Laval is probably best known for The Ballad of Black Tom and The Changeling, and I'm sure his fans will be excited to check out his new offering when it's published on March 21st by One World. Following that, we'll have a short story collection called Abnormal Statistics by Max Booth III. It includes 10 reprints and 3 original stories, including a new novella called Indiana Death Song. I'll be eager to check those out as well. Max Booth III has written a lot of things, but I suspect most people probably know him best for We Need to Do Something, which was adapted as a movie a couple years ago. His work is always a lot of fun, so I'll look forward to some new short stories when Abnormal Statistics is published on March 23rd by Apocalypse Party. And then there's A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. According to the publisher's description, Mom seems off. Her brother's words echo in Sam Montgomery's ear as she turns onto the quiet North Carolina street where their mother lives alone. She brushes the thought away as she climbs the front steps. Sam's excited for this rare extended visit and looking forward to nights with just the two of them, drinking boxed wine, watching murder mystery shows, and guessing who the killer is long before the characters figure it out. But stepping inside, she quickly realizes home isn't what it used to be. Gone is the warm, cluttered charm her mom is known for. Now the walls are painted a sterile white. Her mom jumps at the smallest noises and looks over her shoulder even when she's the only person in the room. And when Sam steps out back to clear her head, she finds a jar of teeth hidden beneath the magazine-worthy rose bushes, and vultures are circling the garden from above. To find out what's got her mom so frightened in her own home, Sam will go digging for the truth. But some secrets are better left buried. I've only read one book by T. Kingfisher so far, and that was The Hollow Places, but I quite liked that one, so I'm looking forward to trying this new one as well, and it's coming March 28th from Nightfire. One I've already heard some chatter about for the month of April is The Insatiable Volt Sisters by Rachel Eve Moulton. It's the summer of 1989, and Beatrice and Henrietta Volt are coming of age on remote Fowler Island, their ancestral home and wild playground. Thicker than thieves, the sisters plot their futures, having no idea that their parents are separating, or that the plan is to separate them. 10 years pass before Henry gets a desperate call from her sister that their father has died suddenly and Bibi needs her to come back to the island for the funeral. But Henry doesn't want to go back. She's barely put the island and all those rumors about missing women behind her. And isn't it odd that she remembers nothing at all about the night she left? And why is she suddenly filled with fear about the quarry pond behind the house? Told from the perspectives of 4 flawed, fascinating women, The Insatiable Volt Sisters is a lush, enthralling fable about monsters, real and imagined. From the unbounded imagination of Rachel Eve Moulton, the critically acclaimed author of Tinfoil Butterfly, comes another eerie, terrifying exploration of family and legacy. Will the Volt Sisters inherit the horrors of their past, or surpass them? I know very little else about the book or the author, but it sounds intriguing, and judging by the amount of discussion I've heard already, I think it's going to be a popular one when it's finally released on April 4th. The same day will also see the release of Paradise 1 by David Wellington, a science fiction horror story. An electrifying novel set in deep space and perfect for fans of science fiction and horror, Paradise 1 follows 2 agents from the United Earth government as they investigate the complete disappearance of humanity's first deep space colony. When Special Agent Petrov and Dr. Li Zhang are woken up from cryogenic sleep, dragged freezing and dripping wet out of their pods with the ship's alarms blaring in the background, they know something is very wrong. Warned by the captain that they're under attack, they have no choice but to investigate. It doesn't take much time to learn they've been met by another vessel, a vessel from Paradise 1, Earth's first deep space colony, and their final destination. Worse still, the vessel is empty, and it carries with it the message that all communications from the 150,000 souls inhabiting the Paradise 1 has completely ceased. Petrov and Zhang must board the empty ship and delve further into deep space to discover the truth of the colony's disappearance. But the further they go, the more dangers loom. I like a good sci-fi horror, and this one sounds like it's got a lot of interesting things going on. I'm always a sucker for a story in which a ship is found empty, whether we're talking about a boat on the water or a spaceship. And since this is the latter and such a huge colony ship, it also seems like it has shades of something like a vanishing colony, which is arguably even creepier. It'll be out on April 4th from Orbit. And also on April 4th, we're getting another sci-fi horror called The Scourge Between the Stars by Ness Brown. As acting captain of the starship Calypso, Jacqueline Albright is responsible for keeping the last of humanity alive as they limp back to Earth from their forebears' failed colony on a distant planet. Faced with constant threats of starvation and destruction in the treacherous minefield of interstellar space, Jacqueline's crew has reached their breaking point. As unrest begins to spread throughout the ship's wards, a new threat emerges, picking off crew members in grim, bloody fashion. Jacqueline and her team must hunt down the ship's unknown intruder if they have any hope of making it back to their own solar system alive. I've heard this one described as something of a cross between Alien and Event Horizon, and since those are probably the quintessential science fiction horror movies, this ought to be interesting. I'm not sure why there's so much sci-fi horror coming this year, but I'm not going to complain about it. The Scourge Between Stars is coming April 4th from Nightfire. That'll be followed by The Haunting of Alejandra, V. Castro's new novel about La Llorona, coming on April 18th from Del Rey. Give me a good story about La Llorona and I'll be first in line to read it. I think she's one of the creepier and more interesting of all the famous spirits of the world, so this book is another no-brainer to add to the list for the year. And as we move on to May, we'll get a chance to read Belith Station by Samantha Kolsnick and Brian Smith. This is a collection of 2 stories, one by each author, both set in the same town. I honestly don't know a whole lot else about the book, but based on the strength of both authors' previous works, it should be another winner, and it'll be out on May 9th from Clash. We're also going to get another collection of short stories, this one by Paul Tremblay. We've already heard a bit about Paul Tremblay because a film adaptation of one of his novels is coming out earlier this year. Well, his first collection of short stories, called The Beast You Are, is also coming out this year, so it should be a pretty exciting year for him. The Beast You Are will be out on July 11th from William Morrow. The same day, Putnam will publish Burn the Negative by Josh Winning. Arriving in LA to visit the set of a new streaming horror series, journalist Laura Warren witnesses a man jumping from a bridge, landing right behind her car. Here we go, she thinks. It's started. Because the series she's reporting on is a remake of a 90s horror flick. A cursed 90s horror flick, which she starred in as a child and has been running from her whole life. In The Guest House, Laura played the little girl with the terrifying gift to tell people how the Needle Man will kill them. When 8 of the cast and crew died in ways that eerily mirrored the movie's on-screen deaths, the film became a cult classic and ruined her life. Leaving it behind, Laura changed her name and her accent, dyed her hair, and moved across the Atlantic. But some scripts don't want to stay buried. Now, as the body count rises again, Laura finds herself on the run with her aspiring actress sister and a jaded psychic, hoping to end the curse once and for all, and to stay out of Needleman's lethal reach. Sounds interesting enough, and I'm intrigued by the mashup of the cursed film and the slasher subgenres, so hopefully it'll be a good read. Believe it or not, this may be the year for books about cursed films, because just a few days later we're also getting Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia of Mexican Gothic fame. This new novel promises to blend Mexican horror movies with Nazi occultism in a story about a Nazi curse placed upon the silver nitrate film stock a horror filmmaker used to create his unfinished masterpiece, and it will be published on July 18 by Del Rey. The first book for August isn't actually a novel, but a book about horror books, and that's 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered by Sadie Hartman. The author is one of the people behind the Nightworms subscription service, and I, for one, am curious to find out which 101 horror books she thinks are the most important. I can almost guarantee her list will be different from my own. After all, how could it be otherwise? But I'm also pretty sure she knows her stuff, so it should be an interesting collection of titles, and it'll be out on August 8 from Page Street. Returning to actual horror novels, we have The Handyman Method by Andrew F. Sullivan and Nick Cutter. When a young family moves into an unfinished development community, cracks begin to emerge in both their new residence and their lives, as a mysterious online DIY instructor delivers dark subliminal suggestions about how to handle any problem around the house. The trials of home improvement, destructive insecurities, and haunted house horror all collide in this thrilling story perfect for fans of Nick Cutter's bestsellers The Troop and The Deep. Sounds perfect for me. I've read Nick Cutter before, and I haven't read Andrew F. Sullivan, but based on the description, I'd read it regardless. As the kind of guy who enjoys watching old reruns of This Old House and still doesn't understand why people buy new things instead of learning to fix the old, this sounds like it was written specifically with somebody like me in mind. I'll be very excited to read The Handyman Method, also coming August 8 from Gallery Saga Press. You thought we were done with Ramsey Campbell, did you? Well, you were wrong. The British Grandmaster has another book called The Lonely Lands, coming on August 15 from Flame Tree Press, about a man trying to help his deceased wife reach the afterlife. It sounds like it may have some shades of Richard Matheson's What Dreams May Come, but probably with a more horrific tone. I can almost guarantee it's not going to be one you'll want to miss. Also on August 15, we're getting Spin a Black Yarn, a collection of 5 novellas from Josh Mallerman, best known as the author of Bird Box. I haven't read a ton of his work, though I did think Bird Box was excellent. Indeed, much more excellent than you'd realize if you'd only watched the movie version. Never mind that, though. But I'll be keen to sample some more of his work with this collection, which will be published by Random House Worlds. And then there's Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward, author of The Last House on Needless Street and Sundial. In a lonely cottage overlooking the windswept Maine coast, Wilder Harlow begins the last book he will ever write. It is the story of a sun-drenched summer of his youth, and of the killer that stalked the small New England town, and of the horrible tragedy that forever bonded him with his friends Nat and Harper in unknowable ways. Decades later, Wilder returns to the town in an attempt to recount that summer's events in his memoirs. But as he writes, Wilder begins to fear his grip on the truth is fading, and that the book may be writing itself. It sounds like an interesting book to me, although I'll be completely honest and admit that it's the author's previous work even more than the book's description that has me excited to give this one a try. Looking Glass Sound will be published by Nightfire on August 22nd. September the 12th looks like it's going to be the day of horror novels about motherhood. The first is What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman. After striking out on her own as a teen mom, Maddie Price is forced to return to her hometown of Brandywine, Virginia, with her 17-year-old daughter. With nothing to her name, she scrapes together a living as a palm reader at the local farmer's market. It's at the market that she reconnects with her high school boyfriend, Henry McCabe, now a reclusive local fisherman whose infant son, Skylar, went missing 5 years ago. Everyone in town is sure Skylar is dead, but when Maddie reads Henry's palm, she's haunted by strange and disturbing visions that suggest otherwise. As she follows the thread of these visions, Maddie discovers a terrifying monster waiting at the center of the labyrinth, and it's coming for everyone she holds dear. Sounds pretty good, and I trust Clay McLeod Chapman to give us a good book. His novel on the satanic panic, Whisper Down the Lane, was one of the best treatments of that moral panic that I've ever read, so I'm quite looking forward to this new one. And then there's No Child of Mine by Nichelle Giraldes. There's something in the dark, and it's starting to whisper. S.E. Cower has defined herself by her ambitions, a fiercely independent woman whose only soft spot is her husband Sanjay. She never imagined herself as a mother. It was never a part of the plan. But then she finds out she's pregnant. As her difficult pregnancy transforms her body and life into something she barely recognizes, her husband spends the nights pacing in the attic, slowly becoming a stranger, and the house begins to whisper. As Essie's pregnancy progresses, both her and Sanjay's lives are warped by a curse that has haunted her family for generations, leaving a string of fatherless daughters in its wake. When she's put on bed rest, Essie trades the last aspects of her carefully planned life for isolation in what should be a welcoming home. But she isn't alone. There's something here that means to take everything from her. And this one also sounds pretty good. I've never read this author before, so I'm looking forward to sampling her work. What Kind of Mother will be published by Quirk Books, and No Child of Mine by Poisoned Pin Press, both on September 12. And that's what I've got so far. I guarantee there will be loads more of both books and movies throughout the year, but either they haven't been announced yet, or their announcements haven't yet come to my own attention. Do be sure to drop some notes down in the comments to let me know what I've missed or which ones you're most excited about. And of course, stick around this channel to stay informed of all kinds of wonderful things happening in the horror world throughout the year. And of course, if you're an author, publisher, filmmaker, distributor, or anyone involved in the horror world, please feel free to drop me a line and let me know what you have in the works. With all of that said, allow me to bring this video to an end before it gets any longer than it already is. So take care and stay scared.